Okay, it's getting close to the end of April 2020, and we still have no idea on when we can resume church. I've seen some hopeful things this week, some things that I think are good. Um, we see some of the models changing as we do more tested for this COVID. Um, and I'm hopeful that in very short order we'll be able to resume church. But until then, I have my new mission letters from this month. Kristen is going to try to post them on our church website so that you can read them. Um, Hopefully that will work. We've never tried that before. Also, do keep in mind that you want to keep praying for your missionaries. Um, this is the COVID thing is worldwide spread, and they're having some troubles with it there also. Um, but I want to talk to you. I've still been studying in Daniel a fair bit, and I want to talk to you about a subject. I'll tell you another one of them "this happened to me" stories. Um, I was talking to a guy this week, and he knows that I'm a Christian, and he said we were talking about COVID and what's going on, and the uncertainty of it and the uncertainty of times, and he made this comment, and it initially kind of irritated me, but he said if you have a God like that lets things like this happen, I don't think I want to be a part of that. And I got to thinking about that, and I'm sure most of us have heard that said from time to time. And I think that is a pretty crude statement. Um, First of all, we were never guaranteed a bed of roses in this life. So I want to read you a couple verses out of Psalms chapter 33. And the psalmist said this: "Behold, the eye of the Lord is upon them that fear him, upon them that hope in his mercy, to deliver their soul from death." Thankfully, my soul has been delivered from death. Hopefully, yours has too. And then he says this: "And to keep them alive in famine." Um, it didn't say to keep him from famine. It said to keep him alive in famine. Every one of us, Christian or not, will have troubles in this life. We're not guaranteed that we're free from trouble. Um, but we can know that God is with us in that trouble. The psalmist went on to say, verse 20, "Our soul waiteth for the Lord. He is our help and our shield." What more do we need than his help and his shield, his protection? Verse 21, "For our heart shall rejoice in him, because we have trusted in his holy name. Let thy mercy, O Lord, be upon us, according as we hope in thee." We have God's mercy. We need to place our hope in him. And then, but we've never been guaranteed to not have trouble. Trouble is part of life. Job said man is born unto trouble. Just because this is something new, this is something that none of us have ever lived through. It comes with a lot of unknowns. Like I said earlier, the models that we're seeing this week come out, computer models, which are dangerous to start with, are changing drastically right now, hopefully in a good direction. So I think it's unfair to say that if that's the God that we serve, that we don't want no part of it. And I think it's risky for Christians if we don't keep a right heart set to come pray to a statement like that. And so when I was reading in Daniel, and this is a very familiar portion of Scripture, if you've gone to Sunday school, you've heard this since you were a little kid. but I wanna read on it a little bit, and I'll set the stage for you a little bit. Actually, this one's just for you. I'll try to keep this one short and sweet, but I want to talk about the fiery furnace for just a little bit. So, in this portion of Scripture, Daniel chapter 3, here we have King Nebuchadnezzar, and I'll just set the stage a little bit. King Nebuchadnezzar had built a golden image to worship and set it up. It says he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And then it says this, verse 2, then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the priests, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the province to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And then the story goes on, and it says that when they start hearing the music played, that everybody is to bow down and worship this. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said that they weren't going to do that, and so there were some people that started complaining to government officials, and eventually made it back to King Nebuchadnezzar that these three Hebrew boys would not bow the knee to a false god. And so if we cut back into the story in verse 14, and Nebuchadnezzar's speaking here, and he has Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in front of him, and he says this, the latter part of chapter, or verse 14 says, do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up. And then verse 15, he says this, now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, the dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, but if you worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hand? So here we got Nebuchadnezzar speaking to these three Hebrew boys, and he says, I'm going to give you a second chance. I'm going to give you a chance that when you hear the music, even though it's been reported unto me that you already didn't do what I told you to do, but when you hear the music, I'm going to give you the opportunity a second time around, a second chance to bow down and worship the God that I've made. And then he kind of asked this question. He said, who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? And verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. In other words, we're not going to mince words. We're not going to beat around the bush. We're going to tell you exactly what we think and exactly why. Verse 17 says this, if so be our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. And so in other words, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, no matter what, we're not going to quit serving our God. And they were determined in that, and I think that's a lesson that we could learn. Verse 18 said this, and I mean, so here's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're standing up to the king. They said, we're not going to serve your gods. They're living in questionable times. I'm sure that somewhere in the back of their mind, they were questioning how God was, what the outcome of this was going to be. And then and it makes light to that. It says verse 18, but if not, and that statement stuck with me this week. It said, but if not, the Hebrew boys, they said, O king, we're not going to bow down, we're not going to serve your God. And Nebuchadnezzar said, well, who's this God that's going to save you? And the Hebrew boys turned around and said, well, he can save us, and he can save us from you, O king. But then they said this, but if not, and for some reason it kind of stuck in my head this week, and and I've been wondering, and hopefully things with this COVID-19 are turning around some. The models are looking better. But if not, what if we have to do this for a while yet? Liz and I talked about it, and I said probably eventually we'll all know someone who's been affected by this. Um, so, what am I going to say to a guy that says, but if not? What am I going to say to a guy that says, well, if that's the God that you serve, I don't really think I want any part of it. But the three Hebrew boys, they said this, but if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. In other words, whether God comes down and saves us from you or not, we're still not going to serve. We're not willing to change. No matter what happens in uncertain times, as a Christian, I think we could take a lesson here that a lot of Christians, they want to compromise. They want to say, well, maybe about this, or well, what about that? And I'm saying to you that the Hebrew boys had it right, and they said, but if not, if God doesn't save us from this, we're still not going to serve your king. We're your God. We're still not going to bow our knee to that. And I think as Christians, we could take example to that when people around us say, well, if that's the God you serve, why do you serve him? Well, we don't know everything in the world. We don't know what all is going to happen. We don't know how the outcome is going to be. But in the meantime, we're going to serve God. We're going to take our time on Sundays. I told Liz the other day, it bothers me that people are creatures of habit, and when they get out of the habit of going to church, it's hard to get back in that habit. And I said it bothers me that if this goes on too long, people will get out of the habit of going to church. But I think we could take a lesson here from these three Hebrew boys that said, we're not going to change. We might not be able to go to church at this point, but we will get back in church. And so then verse 19, it says this, then Nebuchadnezzar, full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So in other words, up till this point, he was trying to reason with him and reason with the three Hebrew boys. And when the Hebrew boys answered him so abruptly and so bluntly that they weren't willing to bargain, they weren't willing to compromise, that it irritated King Nebuchadnezzar, and it said that his form and his visage was changed. And and to make a long story short, he ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter. He ordered the three Hebrew boys pitched in the furnace. It goes on to say that the fire was so hot that the people who threw the three Hebrew boys in the furnace died. And it says they were bound and they fell down in the midst, verse 23, fell down in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar, verse 24, the king was astonished and rose up in haste and spake and said unto his counselors, did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, true, O king. And he answered and said, lo, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Now we've heard this story since we were in Sunday school, and it's really an amazing story, and there's some things in it that amaze me. It amazes me that King Nebuchadnezzar comes to the conclusion that the 4th person in there was like unto the Son of God. But I know this much for sure, that God was there in their time of trouble. God was there. God, I truly believe that if we'll stick to our stuff like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did, that God will wait with us. God will be there. God will make his presence known. He'll get us through this. David said he's our shield. He's our protection. Are we going to have troubles in life? Absolutely. Are we going to get through them all completely unscathed? Probably not. But he is still our shield. He's our, David said it, he's our buckler. Um, and we can lean and rest in the fact that God is with us. God will be with us. He can comfort us. We can find comfort in Him. So hopefully this week, as we go along, I encourage you to read the mission letters that we're going to post. Dave Arnold is asking us to do a fast with him over this. I think that's a good idea. But we can lean on, and we can lean on the fact that God is with us, that God will protect us. And just like the Hebrew boy said, but if not, I wouldn't be surprised that sooner or later we'll all know somebody that's affected by this. We'll all have a story to tell about it. But God is still good. God is still on the throne, and God will wait with us. He'll encourage us. He'll keep us. He won't keep us out of trouble, but He'll keep us through it.